He is come back. Aunt, are you listening? He is come back, and he is the Duke now, the new Duke of Eastmere, and they say he is at Northwend this very week. Maria Oakridge set down the comb of honey she had just lifted from the frame, and was glad her hands had something to hold, because the rest of her had gone very still. Her niece stood in the doorway of the still room, with her bonnet askew from running, bright with the importance of being first with the news, and she did not yet know, could not know, that she had just said the one sentence in all the world that could reach into the quiet her aunt had spent 20 years building and put a crack clean through it. "Which he, Lucy?" Maria said, and her voice came out even, which surprised her. "There are a great many men in the world. You will have to be more particular." "The Duke, the new one. Old Eastmere died at last, you know, and the cousin before him in the spring, both within the year, and the title has gone right past everyone to a soldier, a younger son, who was never meant to have it at all. He has been abroad these 20 years, with the army. And his name? Aunt." Lucy paused for effect, because she was 18 and loved a story, and had no idea she was holding a knife. "His name is Roland. Lord Roland, that was. Is it not the most romantic thing? A soldier who goes away with nothing and comes home a duke. 1 second, 2, 3. "It is a great deal of luck for him," said Maria, and turned back to her bees. She did not faint, and she did not weep, and she did not drop the honey, and she was proud of all three for the rest of the day. She finished the frames. She capped the jars. She sent Lucy home to her mother with a pot of the new honey and a message about Sunday, and she stood a long while afterward in the cool, dim, still room with the hum of the hives coming through the wall, and let herself understand, slowly and completely, that the man she had loved when she was 2 and 20, the man who had taken everything bright in her and carried it off to a war and never sent it back, was 12 miles off across the fields she could see from her own door. Roland. Come home a duke. Come home at all. She was 42 now. She had made, in the long meantime, a life she was not ashamed of, and that was no small thing for a woman with no husband, and no fortune, and no looks to speak of past the first bloom. She kept bees, and the honey was known 3 parishes round, and brought in money that was her own. She kept a garden that fed her and half the cottages near when the winters bit. She was the one they sent for when a confinement went wrong, or a child would not mend, because she had a steady hand and a steadier head, and had sat up more bad nights than the doctor. She read in the evenings. Good books. Her father's, the one inheritance the ruin had left her. She was respected, and useful, and free, and if there was a particular ache that came on certain evenings, when the light went gold over the fields, and the house was very quiet, she had long ago decided that an ache was a thing a person could live alongside, like a stiff knee, and need not make a tragedy of. She had made her peace with solitude. She had made it deliberately, and at cost, the way one makes peace after a long war, by giving up the territory one cannot hold. The territory she had given up was hope, and she had not regretted the treaty, because the alternative had been to spend her whole life waiting at a window for a man who was never coming. And she had seen women do that, grow old and sour at the glass, and she had refused it. She had turned from the window. She had planted the garden and bought the bees and become someone, instead of remaining forever the girl a man had not come back for. And now he had come back. to understand what that cost her, and why she did not run across 12 miles of field that same evening. You must understand what had happened 20 years before, when the world was a different shape, and Maria Oakridge had not yet learned the difference between hope and a window. They had met in the ordinary way, in the small society of a country district, when she was 20, and he was 24, and the second son of a family grander than her own, but not so grand that the two could not stand in the same room. Her father was still alive then, and not yet ruined, a gentleman of modest land and immoderate optimism. Roland was a younger son, which in those days meant a man with a name and no money, bound for the army, because the army was where younger sons were sent to make a way or die trying. He had no expectation of the title. 2 healthy lives stood between him and it. His father and his elder brother, and a younger son, does not count on his family dying. And Roland had counted on nothing but his own 2 hands, and what they might earn him with a sword. She had loved him almost at once, and been ashamed of how fast, and tried to be sensible about it, and failed. He was not handsome in the way the word is usually meant. He had a plain, strong face, and chestnut hair, and odd grey-green eyes that changed with the weather of his mood, and he was quiet in company and dry when he did speak. And he looked at her, from the first evening, as though she were the only thing in the room worth the trouble of looking at. No one had ever looked at her so. She was the elder of 2 sisters, and the plain one. Everyone said so kindly, the steady, useful one, and her younger sister Delphine was the beauty, and Maria had arranged herself early into the part of the sister who did not expect to be chosen. And then a younger son with grey-green eyes had chosen her across a country drawing-room, and gone on choosing her all that spring and summer, and she had let herself, for one season, stop being sensible. They came to an understanding. Not a betrothal, for he had nothing yet to betroth her on, but a promise, made in her father's orchard on a warm evening at the end of that summer. She remembered the evening entire, and would all her life. The apples were small and green still on the boughs, and the light came sideways and gold through the leaves, and he had walked her out past the hives her father kept, the hives that were, though she did not know it then, the first seed of the whole later life. He had stopped under the oldest tree, and turned to her, and he had not got down on his knee, because he had nothing to offer, and would not mock either of them with a gesture, and he had said it plainly, soldier plain, that he was going to the wars with empty pockets, and might come back with nothing, or not come back at all, and that he would not bind her to a dead man or a poor one. And she had said, with the whole reckless certainty of 20, that he was not to decide for her what she could bear, that she would wait, and that the waiting was hers to give, and not his to refuse. He had looked at her a long moment in the gold light. Then he had taken her hand, and turned it over, and pressed his mouth once to the palm of it, and folded her fingers shut over the place as though to keep it there, and that had been the whole of their betrothal. A kiss in the hand of a girl who did not yet know the world might have other plans. She had meant it the way the young mean things, totally, with no notion that anything could come between a promise and its keeping. He went in the autumn, and for a while the letters came. They came from Portugal, and then from Spain. Soldiers' letters, full of mud and marches, and small dry jokes, and under the jokes, a steadiness that was better than any flourish, a man telling her, without saying so, that he carried her with him. She answered every one. She lived between them, from packet to packet, and the waiting was hard, but it was a clean hardness, a thing with an end in sight, because he was alive, and he wrote, and the war could not last forever. And then, in the second year, the letters changed, and then they stopped. The change was small at first, a coolness, a brevity, and she told herself it was the campaign, the exhaustion, the distance. Then a longer silence. And then the letter that ended it. It was in his hand, or a hand so like his that she never thought to doubt it. It was kind, which was the worst of it. It said that the war had altered him, that he had seen things that made a man unfit for the hopes of a softer time, that he had formed, he would not lie to her, an attachment to another, the daughter of a fellow officer, and that he released her from any promise she might feel bound by, and begged her to forget him and be happy, and signed himself her friend. She had read it 4 times standing up, and then sat down on the orchard step, where they had made the promise, and not got up again for a long while. She had written back once, a short letter, wishing him well, because she had her pride even then, and would not beg. And she had heard nothing more, ever. And within the year her father's affairs had collapsed, and there was the ruin to live through, the sale, his death, and somewhere in the middle of all that the news came round the district that Lord Rowland's regiment had gone on to other fronts, and that he was much changed and not expected home, and Maria had folded the whole bright season away like a gown one has grown too old to wear, and become the woman who kept bees. What she did not know, sitting on the orchard step, with the kind cruel letter in her hand, was that Rowland, 1,000 miles off, in a tent that smelled of canvas and rain, had some weeks earlier received a letter in her hand, or a hand so like hers that he never thought to doubt it, telling him that she had thought better of a soldier's uncertain prospects, that her family pressed her toward a match of substance, that she was to be married before the year was out, and that she begged him, for both their sakes, to release her, and not to write again. He had read it once, and then folded it very small and put it in his breast. And he had not released her in words because he could not make his hand form them, but he had stopped writing because a man does not press his letters on a married woman, and he had turned, with a coldness that served him well in his trade, to the only thing left that asked nothing of his heart, which was the war. He had been a reckless officer after that, the kind that lives by accident, and he had risen because reckless men who live are useful, and he had spent 20 years believing that the steadiest girl he ever knew had taken one look at his empty pockets and chosen money, and that the fault in trusting her had been his own. 2 letters, neither of them written by the hand that signed it. That was the whole of it. 2 letters, and 20 years, and 2 people who had each spent those years believing the other one faithless, and building, each alone, a hard, separate peace around the wound. Neither of them yet knew the letters were forged. That knowledge was 20 years coming, and it would come the hard way, as such things do. What it had made of him, in the meantime, the world could see only the surface of. Rowland had come home to Northwend in the first hard week of that autumn, and home was a word that did not fit. The great house sat in its neglected park, like something abandoned by a tide, the gutters choked, the long rooms shut and dust-sheeted, the whole estate run thin under the careless management of a dying brother and a steward, who had robbed the dead man genteelly for years. He walked through 40 rooms he had never expected to own, that no one had ever expected him to own, and felt nothing he could call belonging. He had earned everything he valued at the point of a sword among men who slept in mud, and the title had come to him by the simple accident of 2 coffins, and he wore it the way a man wears another man's coat, conscious always of the wrong fit. His cousin felt the fit was wrong, too, and said so, in the pleasant glancing way of a man who believes the property ought morally to have been his. Gervase was the next heir, a smooth, comfortable gentleman of 40, who had spent the dukedom in his imagination for years, while 2 lives, and then only one, stood in his way. And the arrival of a soldier cousin out of Spain had cost him a fortune he had already mentally spent. He came to Northwend within the month, ostensibly to welcome, in fact to measure, and over a poor dinner in the one warmed room he turned the talk with great delicacy to the future. "You will marry, of course," Gervase said, swirling the indifferent wine. "The line wants securing. A man in your position cannot be too long about it. The world counts the months. There are several very suitable young women, I could name them. A duke of 8 and 40 wants a wife of 20. It is only sense. An heir does not wait on sentiment." He smiled. "Unless, cousin, you mean to leave things as they fall, in which case the rest of us must simply be patient." Roland understood the whole of it, that his cousin would be glad of an old bachelor duke who got no son, that every year he stayed unwed or childless was a year nearer the title falling to Gervase, and that the pleasant pressure to go and marry some girl of 20 was, underneath, the opposite wish, wearing courtesy's coat. He said only that he would marry when he found a reason to, and not before. And Gervase took his leave well, pleased, reading the answer as the reluctance of a confirmed soldier, which suited his arithmetic admirably. What neither his cousin, nor his great-aunt, nor any soul in the district knew, was the single fact that had walked into Roland's chest the first hour he was home, and would not walk out. That the beekeeper across the fields, the woman the neighbourhood spoke of with such respect, the steady Miss Oakridge who had never married, was the girl from the orchard. He had believed for 20 years that she had thrown him over for money. The believing had been a stone he carried, and he had built his hardness around it, the way an oyster builds round grit. And now the stone made no sense at all, because a woman who had thrown a poor soldier over for a rich match would, by every law of the world, have made the rich match, and she had not. She had grown old alone with bees, and a woman did not do that for money's sake. The arithmetic would not come out. It had not let him sleep since the day he learned she was there. And so, against his pride, against his hardness, against the stone, he had taken his aunt's carriage and gone. He came to see her within the week. She had known he would have to, eventually, in a district so small, and she had rehearsed it 100 ways, and was prepared for none of them, when his great-aunt's carriage, not his own, stopped at her gate on a grey afternoon, and he got down from it alone. He was older. Of course he was older. So was she. But she had been carrying a man of 4 and 20 in her memory for 20 years, and the man at her gate was 8 and 40, broader, harder used, grey come into the chestnut at his temples, a soldier's stillness on him now, where there had been a young man's quickness. The grey-green eyes were the same. They found her where she stood in the doorway, with a trug of beans on her hip, an aging woman in a print gown with earth on her hands, and she watched him take her in, and she lifted her chin and let him, because she would be looked at as she was, or not at all, and she was past the age of arranging her face for any man. For a moment neither spoke. The garden hummed around them. A blackbird went on with its evening business in the hedge, as though nothing in the world were happening, which was a mercy, because something was. "Miss Oakridge," he said at last. The voice was the same, and it went through her like a key in an old lock. "I hope I do not intrude. My aunt insisted I pay my respects to the neighborhood. I did not know, until I was told, that you were still—" He stopped, started again, more carefully. "That you were here. Still here. Still Miss Oakridge." He had not known she never married. She saw the small calculation move behind his eyes, saw him fail to make it come out right, and she understood that whatever he had believed of her for 20 years, it had not included her growing old alone in a cottage with bees. And she felt a bitter little flicker of satisfaction that her life had refused to fit his story of it. "Your grace is very good," she said. "You find me as you see. I keep bees. I am told the honey is tolerable." She would not curtsy low. She gave him the bend a respectable woman gives a great man, and no more. "I congratulate you on your title. It was a long road to it, I think." "A long road," he agreed. Something crossed his face at that, some private grief. 2 deaths had made him a duke, a father and a brother, and she had spoken lightly of the road, without meaning to tread on graves. She saw him decide not to mind it. "You are kind. I had not expected—" He looked at the garden, the hives, the neat, hard-won order of it all, the life she had built in the hole he had left. "You have done a great deal here," he said, and there was something under it she could not read, and did not trust herself to. "One does what one can," said Maria, "with what one is left." It was not meant as a blow, but she watched it land as one, watched him take the small, precise hit of it, with what one is left, and she was not sorry. There was 20 years of unsent anger in her, and it had to go somewhere, and it was going, in small, cold, civil pieces, into the most courteous conversation 2 people ever had over a garden gate. He stayed 10 minutes. They spoke of the weather and the harvest and his aunt's health, and every sentence was a door politely closed. And when he left, lifting his hat with a soldier's correctness, she stood at the gate and watched, the carriage out of sight, and then went into the still room and put her face against the cool plaster of the wall, and stood like that until the shaking stopped. She had thought she had made her peace. She found the peace had been a treaty with an absent enemy, and the enemy had come home, and treaties do not hold against the living. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. A district so small cannot keep 2 people apart who do not wish to be kept apart, and it cannot, more cruelly, keep apart 2 people who do wish it. They were thrown together that autumn, whether they would or no, because the Duke had come home to an estate that had been let go to ruin under his dying brother, and the one person in 3 parishes who knew the land, the tenants, the failing drains, and the disputed boundaries, and which cottage roofs would not see another winter, was the beekeeper at the cottage by the orchard. It was his great-aunt who arranged it, and Maria understood within a week exactly what the old woman was about, and could not, for her life, decide whether to be grateful or furious. Lady Sibylla was nearly 90, sharp as a lancet, and she had been a girl in the district when Maria's grandmother was a bride. She remembered everything. She remembered in particular a certain summer, 20 years gone, when a younger son with grey-green eyes had been so plainly, hopelessly gone over a beekeeper's daughter that the whole neighbourhood had talked of it. And she remembered when it ended, and she had never believed the version the world settled on, that the steady Oakridge girl had thrown the boy over for money because it had not matched anything she knew of the girl. Old women who remember everything are dangerous to a buried thing. And Lady Sibylla had decided, with the ruthlessness of the very old, who have no time left for delicacy, to dig. So she sent for Maria, on estate business, ostensibly. The Duke needed a survey of the tenancies before the quarter day. Miss Oakridge knew the people. Would Miss Oakridge be so good? And Miss Oakridge, who needed the fee, and could not refuse the principal landowner of the district without making more of a thing than she could bear to make, went up to Northwend with her notebook and her steady face, and found the Duke waiting in the estate room with the ledgers open, and the two of them spent a long, careful morning over rent rolls and repairs, speaking only of barley and slate, and it was the most exhausting morning of her life, because under every word about barley was the whole unsaid country of what they had been to each other, and they both walked the edge of it all morning, and neither fell in. The work itself forced the first true thing between them, and it forced it within days, over a matter that had nothing to do with either of their hearts, and everything to do with the kind of people they had each become. There was a tenancy at the low end of the estate, the Brearleys, a widow and 4 children, and the late Duke's steward had served them notice to quit at the quarter day, the arrears being 2 seasons deep. The steward, a fat civil man named Mr. Soap, who had grown rich on a dying master's inattention, brought the matter to the estate room as a formality, expecting the new Duke to sign where his finger pointed. Maria was there over the ledgers. She set down her pen. "The Brearleys are not in arrears through idleness," she said. "John Brearley drowned in the spring flood, pulling another man's beast out of the race. The widow has kept 4 children, and the rent paid to within 2 seasons on a dead man's holding, which is more than this office managed for the old Duke by these books. If your Grace turns her out, he turns out the cleverest small farmer left on this land, and he does it on the word of a steward who has charged the estate for a new barn roof at Cope's farm 3 years running, and there is no new roof at Cope's farm. I was there on Tuesday." The room went very quiet. Mr. Soap's civil colour drained and then flooded. He began, with dignity, to be insulted. Roland held up one hand and stopped him, and turned to Maria, and asked her 3 questions, short soldier's questions, about the roof, the dates, the books, and she answered each one, flat and exact. And at the end of the 3rd he sat back and looked at his steward for a long moment, with the particular attention of a man who has spent 20 years deciding very fast whom to trust with his life. "You will bring me the accounts for Cope's farm before noon tomorrow," Roland told the steward, "and the receipts for 3 barn roofs, and you will not trouble the widow Brearley again until I have read them." Mr. Soap went out a smaller man than he came in, and within the fortnight He had resigned his post to avoid a worse end, and the estate began, slowly, to mend, because someone had at last told its master the truth, and its master had been a soldier long enough to know the sound of the truth when he heard it. Afterward, alone in the estate room, Roland looked at Maria across the ledgers, with something new in his weathered face. "You would have made a formidable officer," he said. "You saw his flank before I did. I have lived among these people 20 years while you were away winning your battles," she answered, gathering her papers. "Someone had to mind the ground." She did not say "while you were away" as a reproach, quite, but it sat in the room a moment, the 20 years, the absence, and she let it sit because she was done pretending the years had not happened. And so she saw was he. It became a habit those mornings, because the work was real and took weeks. And in the doing of real work, side by side, the careful doors began, against both their wills, to come ajar. It was in the 3rd week that the first crack showed in the story each had lived by, and it showed by accident, over a question of nothing. They had ridden out to a far tenancy, she on the estate's quiet cob, he on his own horse, to look at a boundary in dispute, and the matter was settled in an hour, and they were turning home through a lane gone gold with the turning year. And he said, not looking at her, in the tone of a man probing an old wound to see if it still ached, "You never married then?" "No," said Maria. "I had understood," he said, carefully, "that you were to, before the year was out, that it was settled." She drew rein. The cob stopped, and his horse stopped, and the lane was very quiet, and she looked at him across the small space between the two horses, with a frown gathering between her brows. "Settled by whom?" she said. "I was never to be married, Your Grace, before that year, or any year. There was no match. There was no man. There was nothing to settle, for there was no money, and no offer, and after a certain letter reached me, no heart for it either. Where did you come by such an understanding?" He had gone very still in the saddle, the soldier's stillness, the stillness of a man who has just heard the ground shift under a thing he has stood on for 20 years. "From you," he said. "I had it from you. A letter, in your hand. You wrote that your family pressed you toward a match of substance, that you had thought better of a soldier's prospects, that you were to be married, and begged me to release you and write no more. I wrote no such letter." Her voice was low, and it did not shake, but the lane had tilted around her. "I never wrote it. I would have cut off my hand first. Roland, I wrote you that I would wait, and I waited, and the only letter that ended anything was yours. Yours, in your hand, telling me the war had changed you, and you had formed another attachment, the daughter of an officer, and that you released me, and I should forget you, and be happy. I have it still. God help me, I have kept it 20 years. "I never wrote that," he said. "There was no daughter of any officer. There was never anyone. There has never in 20 years been anyone but—" He stopped. The two horses shifted. A leaf came down between them, gold turning, and neither watched it fall. "Maria," he said, and it was the first time he had used her name, and neither of them marked it then, for they were both staring at the same impossible shape rising out of the past. "Maria, if you did not write your letter, and I did not write mine, then who did?" And there it was, laid bare in a gold lane on an autumn afternoon, the thing that had eaten 20 years. That they had each been faithful, both of them, all along, that neither had abandoned the other, that 2 letters in 2 forged hands had reached across a war, and parted two people who had never, for 1 hour, stopped being true. It was the cruelest thing either had ever known, and it was also, in the same breath, the lifting of the cruelest thing. And they sat their horses in the lane, and could not speak for the size of it. She did not go to him. He did not come to her. They were not young, and a wound 20 years deep does not close, because its cause is named. It only, at last, begins to be a clean wound instead of a poisoned one. But something had changed in the lane that could not change back, and they both knew it. And they rode home in a silence entirely unlike the silences before, a silence with a question burning in the middle of it. And the question was not, "Do you love me?" For that was suddenly, terribly answered. The question was who. In the days after the lane, with that question burning unanswered between them, the careful formality they had kept up for weeks fell away, because it could not survive the knowledge that they had both been faithful. They were not lovers again. They were two middle-aged people picking through the rubble of a thing, trying to learn what was still standing. And one grey evening, walking back from a far field, with the light going out of the sky, Roland told her the part of it she had not guessed, the part that was his to carry, and he told it to her alone, in a flat, steady voice, looking at the hedge and not at her. "When I had your letter," he said, "the one I now know you never wrote, I stopped minding whether I lived. I want you to understand what that meant in my trade. A man who does not mind dying is reckoned brave. He is given the worst work, the forlorn hopes, the breaches, and he does them because what is there to lose? I did a great many things in those years that the world called gallant, and gave me steps in rank for, and not one of them was courage. It was none of it courage. It was a man walking into fire because he had been told the one thing that made the fire seem warmer than going home. My whole reputation, the career that in the end carried me up to this title I never wanted, is built on a lie your sister told. I rose because I did not care to live. That is the man you are looking at. I would have you know it before you look at me any longer." Maria walked a little way in silence. The first stars were out. She thought of the orchard, and the steady young man who had carried her with him to the wars, and the reckless stranger the letter had made of him. And she understood that the forgery had not parted two people only. It had killed two people and left two others to wear their names. "Then we are even," she said at last, quietly. "For I did not walk into fire. I did the other thing, which is no braver. I shut the window and called it peace. And a great deal of what I have built these 20 years, the bees and the garden, and the usefulness, fine as it is, I built partly so that I should never have to feel again what that letter made me feel. We have both spent 20 years not living, Roland, in our different ways. The only difference is that yours got you a dukedom, and mine got me good honey." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, the first near smile she had drawn from him in 20 years, and it undid her more than grief could have, and she looked away at the stars until she had herself again. But the lifting of the old wound did not lift the present trouble, and the present trouble had a face, and the face was handsome and discontented, and belonged to her sister. Lady Sibylla gave a dinner at North Wend that month to bring the new duke before the county, and the county came in its curiosity, and the evening became, for Maria, an education in exactly how the world meant to read her. She had been asked, because she had become indispensable about the estate, and she went in her one good gown, and she felt the temperature of the room the moment she entered it. The matrons of the district had already settled the story among themselves, that the beekeeper had got her hooks into a duke gone soft in the head from foreign wars, an aging spinster presuming on a girlhood acquaintance, and it was spoken in the language such things are always spoken in. The kind glance, the lowered voice, the loud praise of some blooming girl of 18 offered up pointedly within Maria's hearing, as the sort the Duke would naturally choose. She bore it. She had borne worse, and she had a face for it, 20 years in the making, and she gave them nothing to carry home. Delphine carried the campaign. She arrived radiant with purpose, her daughter Lucy beside her, in a new gown the household could not afford. And she spent the evening steering the bewildered girl into the Duke's path with a persistence that would have been comic had it not been so cold. Lucy by the Duke at dinner. Lucy asked to sing. Lucy's accomplishments praised at carrying volume. And through it all, Delphine's bright voice doing the work. What a pity dear Maria never married. But then some women are not made for it. They find their little comforts, the bees and so forth, while the young must be got established. Maria watched her sister offer up the child Maria had half raised as a counter in a game whose stakes the girl did not even know. And she watched Lucy's misery, for Lucy had no wish to be married to a man 30 years her senior, and every wish not to be paraded. And somewhere across that long, bright, dreadful evening, Maria made a decision, cold and clear, that whatever she herself chose to do about the Duke, whatever it cost her pride, she would not stand by and let Delphine spend Lucy to win an old game. The girl, at least, she would protect. It was the first decision the evening gave her. It would not be the last. Her sister was not the only one made anxious by the way the wind had begun to set. The talk of the dinner reached Gervase within the week, and the cousin came back to Northwend with his courtesy worn noticeably thinner. For a duke who married a girl of 20 and got a son was a manageable disappointment. But a duke who married a spinster of 2 and 40 was a catastrophe, with a different shape entirely. And Gervase had not spent a lifetime counting on the title to lose it now to a beekeeper past childbearing. He did not trouble to be delicate this time. "I will speak plainly, cousin, as one family man to another," he said, though they were neither of them family men, because someone must, and your aunt will not. The county is laughing. They are saying the new duke has lost his head over a middle-aged nobody he knew as a boy, a portionless spinster who keeps bees, and that he means to marry her. I have told them it is nonsense, that no man in his senses throws away the succession of a dukedom on a sentiment and a woman who can give him no heir. Tell me I have not told them a lie. When Roland said nothing, only watched him with the flat soldier's attention that had unmanned better men than Gervase, the cousin's voice rose a register. Think what you do. There is the title, the name, 300 years of it. You would let it pass to me, to my boys, by default, for the sake of a few years' company with a woman the world has finished with. It would be the act of a man unhinged. I say it for your own sake. You say it, Roland answered, for the sake of my dying childless, which you have wanted from the hour I came home, and which I begin to think I should arrange purely for the pleasure of disobliging you. He stood. You may tell the county whatever you please. You may count on the title or not, as suits you. But you will not again, in my house, call that lady a woman the world has finished with, for she has done more useful work in this district in 20 years than your whole line has done in 300, and the world is not finished with her. It has only, like you, never troubled to look at her properly. Good day, cousin." Gervais went, and the threat of the empty cradle and the lost line went with him. And it was a real threat, and Roland weighed it honestly in the weeks that followed, and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that it weighed nothing at all. What settled it for him was a night he was not meant to see, the night old Hester Coombs' grandchild came wrong into the world. He had been riding back late from a far part of the estate when he saw the lantern moving at the Coombe cottage and the knot of frightened people at the door. And he stopped, as a landlord stops, to ask was there trouble. And they told him the doctor was 12 miles off at another bed, and the child would not come, and the young mother was failing, and that they had sent for Miss Oakridge, who was already within. He might have ridden on. There was nothing for a duke to do at such a door. He got down instead, and stood in the dark yard among the tenants. And through the small lit window, he watched her work. He watched Maria Oakridge save 2 lives with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, and her voice low and certain in the terrible little room. Watched her turn a frightened girl's panic into obedience by the sheer steadiness of her. Watched her do with her 2 hands and her cool head a thing the whole science of the age could not have done faster, and bring, near dawn, a living child into a quieted room. He watched the tenants' faces in the lantern light as they waited on her word, and he saw that they did not regard her as the county regarded her, a spinster to be pitied or a fortune hunter to be watched. They regarded her as the most important person in their world, which on that night she was. When she came out at last into the grey yard, spent wiping her hands, and found the Duke of Eastmere standing among her neighbours in the cold dawn where he had no business to be, she stopped, and the 2 of them looked at each other across the trampled mud. And neither said a word, and a great deal passed. He rode home as the sun came up, and knew with the finality of a man who has decided whom to trust with his life, that his cousin could have the title and welcome, and the county could laugh until its sides ached, and that he would marry that woman if she would have him, though it cost him the name and the line and the good opinion of every soul in 3 counties, because he had spent 20 years among the brave, and had only that night, at a poor cottage window, seen the genuine article, and a man does not find the genuine article twice. The answer to who was a person Maria did not want it to be, and she fought knowing it for a fortnight, because to know it was to lose something she had thought she still had, which was a sister. She had not been close to Delphine in years. The beauty of the family had married, at 21, a baronet named Crail, Sir Walter Crail, a dull, rich, heavy man, and had become Lady Crail, and had got from the match exactly the consequence she had wanted, and nothing else she might have wanted, and had grown, across 20 years of consequence without contentment, into a woman with a beautiful, discontented face and a tongue that found the tender place in everyone, and pressed it pleasantly, smiling. She lived 4 miles off, in a house too large for her happiness, and she had 1 daughter, Lucy, the bright, heedless girl who ran with the news. And Lucy was the one warm thing that passed between the 2 sisters, for Maria had half raised her, had given the lonely, overlooked child of a cold marriage the welcome her own mother had not the warmth to give, and loved her as near to a daughter as a childless woman is allowed. It was Delphine who had been there 20 years ago. Delphine, who had access to the post, who franked the family letters, who could copy a hand, for she had always been clever with a pen, cleverer than her sister, and idle, and full of a jealousy no one had thought to take seriously, because she was the beauty, and what had the beauty to be jealous of? But Maria, forcing herself at last to remembered things she had let lie, remembered Delphine's strange brightness that second year, her eagerness for the post, her odd consoling triumph when the bad letter came. There, you see, you are well out of it. A soldier with nothing. You are far too good. Remembered that Delphine had also loved Roland. In the careless, covetous way, she loved anything her sister had, and had been refused his notice, and had not been a woman to forgive being passed over for the plain one. It fit. It fit so well and so horribly that Maria was sick with it, and still she might have left it buried, out of the cowardice that calls itself keeping the peace, had the proof not come into her hands by a road she never foresaw. It came by Lucy. The girl had been helping her mother turn out an old escritoire, a wet afternoon's work, and in a jammed drawer, behind another drawer, she had found a packet of letters tied in faded ribbon, and being 18 and incurable about anything that looked like a secret, she had read them before she thought, and what she read had frightened her so badly that she had brought the whole packet straight across 4 miles of mud to the one person she trusted in the world, her aunt. "I do not understand them, Aunt," she said, white-faced, the packet held out in both hands as though it burned. "They are in your writing, some of them. Only I do not think you wrote them. And there is one that is the Duke's writing, and they are about, oh please, will you only look and tell me I have made it into something it is not?" Maria looked. They were the originals. Her own true letters to Roland, the real ones, the ones full of waiting and love, intercepted and never sent, kept these 20 years for a reason no sane heart could supply. And with them the drafts, the practice sheets, a younger Delphine's hand labouring to become Maria's hand, to become Roland's hand, line after line of it, the forger's patient apprenticeship, and at the bottom the fair copies that had been kept back when the cruel, finished letters went out into the world to do their work. It was all there. It was undeniable. 20 years of 2 lives lay in a faded ribbon in a girl's shaking hands, and the woman who had done it had kept the evidence, had not been able to burn it, which told Maria more about her sister's 20 years than any confession could. For only the guilty keep the thing that would hang them, out of some terrible need to keep the truth alive somewhere, even as they bury it. "You have made it into nothing it is not," Maria said very quietly, and put her arm around the frightened girl, because whatever was coming, the child should not carry it alone. "You have been braver than you know to bring me this. Now you must let me carry it, Lucy. It is mine to carry. It was always mine. There was a thing she had to do before she would let herself go to Roland with the proof, and it was the hardest thing in the whole long business, harder than the gold lane, harder than the cottage gate. She had to face her sister, not for vengeance. She found, looking into herself, that she did not want vengeance, that 20 stolen years had burned the wanting of it out of her, and left only a great weariness and a need to hear the thing said aloud by the mouth that had done it. She went to Delphine alone, in the too large house, in the cold, handsome morning room, with the ribboned packet in her bag, and she shut the door, and she laid the letters on the table between them without a word. Delphine looked at them. Her beautiful, discontented face did not crumple. It did something worse. It went smooth and blank and very old, all at once, the face of a woman watching the one thing she had dreaded for 20 years arrive at last in her own morning room, and there was almost, under the dread, a kind of relief, the relief of the hunted thing that hears the dogs and knows the running is over. "So," Delphine said, "Lucy, I wondered, when I missed them, whether she..." She stopped. She did not pick the letters up. "You have come to ruin me, I suppose. You would be within your rights. Sir Walter would put me out of doors if he knew his wife was a forger. The county would never have me again. You have it all there in your bag, my whole life, and you have only to open it." "I have not come to ruin you," said Maria. "I have come to ask you why." And Delphine told her, because there was nothing left to do but tell, and it came out of her in a flat, exhausted voice with 20 years of acid in it, the whole of it, that she had loved him too, or wanted him, which she had never troubled to distinguish, that she could not endure that the plain sister, the dull, steady one, should have the one man who had ever made the neighborhood sit up, when she, the beauty, was offered only Sir Walter and his consequence, that she had told herself it was for Maria's good, a soldier with no money, a bad match, that she was saving her sister from herself, that she had copied the hands one wet fortnight, almost as a game, to see if she could, and found she could. And then the game had a momentum she could not stop, and the letters went, and the thing was done, and could not be undone. And she had married her baronet, and waited for the gladness the cleverness was supposed to buy her. And it had never come. 20 years it had never come. She had watched her sister keep bees and be loved by the parish, and raise her own neglected child with more warmth than she herself could find. And she had grown only more bitter, because the plain sister had built a life out of the wreckage Delphine made for her, and seemed, damn her, almost happy in it, while Delphine sat in her large, cold house with her consequence and her guilt, and grew old, hating the thing she had done, and unable to confess it, and unable to forget it, and unable, above all, to forgive her sister for surviving so well. The ruin meant to break her. "And now he is come back," Delphine said. "A duke, free, and I have spent the autumn telling myself I might still set it right by other means, that if Lucy were thrown in his way, if a young, fresh face, a duke wants an heir, no one would think twice, and I could have, through my daughter, the thing I lost, and bury the old business forever under a new wedding." She laughed, a dreadful small sound. "You see what I am. I would have spent my own girl to cover my crime. I have been trying to marry Lucy to the man I stole from you, to keep you from him a second time. That is what 20 years of it has made of me." She looked up, and her eyes were dry, which was the worst thing in the room. "Go on, then. Open the bag. I have been waiting 20 years for someone to make me stop." Maria stood a long moment in the cold, handsome room and looked at her sister, the ruined beauty, the drowning woman who had pulled 2 other people under to keep from going down alone, and she found that the thing rising in her was not triumph, and was not even any longer anger. It was grief, plain grief, for all of it, for the 3 lives the wet fortnight had cost, her own and Roland's and Delphine's own. For Delphine had not escaped the wreck either. She had only thought, 20 years ago, that there was a way to win that did not cost the winner, and there never is. "I am not going to open the bag," Maria said. "I am not going to tell Sir Walter, or the county. Not for your sake, Delphine. I will not pretend it is for your sake. For Lucy's. The girl has done nothing, and she loves you. God knows why. And I will not make her the daughter of a public disgrace to satisfy a justice that will not give me back a single one of the years you took. But hear me. You will not go near him with that child again. You will let Lucy make her own match in her own time, far from your scheming. And you will live the rest of your life knowing that I know, and that I chose not to ruin you, which you will find, I think, is a heavier thing to carry than ruin would have been. That is all the punishment I have it in me to want. It is more than enough." She took up the packet, the true letters and the false, and she went out, and she left her sister sitting alone in the large cold room, with 20 years of consequence, and no one in the world to tell. And that was the end of Delphine in any way that mattered, though she lived on a long time after, diminished, watchful, never quite forgiven, and never quite punished, which was, as Maria had said, the heaviest sentence she could have been given. She took the letters to Roland that same afternoon, because some things must not be slept on. She found him in the estate room at Northwend, and she laid the packet on the table among the ledgers, the true letters and the forged drafts together, and she watched him read them, watched 20 years rearrange themselves behind his weathered face, watched the grey-green eyes go bright, and then wet, and then, at last, fixed on her with a look she had not had from any living soul in 2 decades. "All this time," he said. His voice was not steady. "All this time you were true, and I believed—" He put the letters down. His hand was not steady either. "I went into the rest of that war wanting to die, and behaved accordingly, and lived by accident, and I told myself it was the war that had hollowed me, and it was not the war. It was believing you had weighed me and found me worth less than a comfortable house. 20 years I have carried that, and it was a lie, a thing your sister wrote one wet fortnight, and we have lost—" He could not finish it. He did not need to. The arithmetic was in the room with them, large and unpayable. "We have lost the years," Maria finished for him, gently, because one of them had to say it, and her voice was the steadier. "Yes, we have. I will not let either of us pretend we have not. I am 42, Roland. You are 48. The orchard where you made me that promise belongs to other people now, and my father is dead, and your brother, and the young man, and the young woman who stood in it are as gone as if they had died, because in a way they did. The lie killed them, and we are what grew after. I've made my peace with that. I made it long ago, before I knew it was a lie. I do not know how to unmake it, and I'm not sure I should try. Maria." He came round the table. He did not touch her. He had learned, somewhere in 20 years, not to reach for things he had not been given leave to take. "I am not asking for the orchard. I know it is gone. I am not such a fool as to come to a woman of 42 and ask her to be a girl of 20 for me. I should despise myself, and you would be right to despise me. I do not want the girl in the letters. I have read the girl in the letters this afternoon, and she breaks my heart. But she is not who I have spent 3 weeks unable to stop thinking of. That is the woman who told me one does what one can with what one is left, and let me feel the edge of it, and was right to. The woman who keeps bees and balances her own accounts, and is sent for when the doctor fails, and does not need me, does not need any man, has made an entire life that asks nothing of me. He drew a breath. I am too old and too plain and too late to offer you a romance. I am offering you a marriage, to a tired soldier who has been a duke 6 months and hates it, who needs, more than he has ever needed anything, one person in the world who knew him before the title and will tell him the truth without it. That is you. It was always going to be you. It was you in a tent in Spain, and it is you in this miserable ledger room, and it will be you when they put me in the ground. Not the girl. You, the woman who did not wait at the window. Will you have me, knowing exactly what we have lost, and exactly how little time is left to make anything of what remains? She was quiet a long moment. Through the window, the autumn light lay gold over the neglected park he had come home to mend, and she thought of her hives and her garden, and the long-ordered solitary piece she had built stone by stone out of the rubble he had not, after all, made, and she understood that he was not asking her to give that piece up. He was asking to come and live inside it, to be one more thing she had chosen, rather than the thing that had once been done to her. There is a cost you have not named, she said. You are a duke, and you want an heir, or your family does, or the world does. I am 42. There will most likely be no child. The title will go to your cousin. You will have married, at the world's reckoning, beneath you, and too late, and to no dynastic purpose. An aging spinster with bees. They will say you ran mad in the wars. Have you counted that? I have counted it, he said. Let the cousin have the title. He is welcome to the whole cold weight of it. I did not want it. I wanted, my entire life, one true thing, and I had it once, and it was stolen. And I am not going to stand in this room and lose it a second time to the opinion of people I do not respect about an heir I do not care for. If we are given a child, I will be glad. If we are not, I will have you, which is the thing I asked the world for and never got, and I will not call a life that contains it a life of no purpose. Count it counted. It weighs nothing against you. 1 second, 2, 3. Roland, she said. His name, the second time, given now and not flung. She had not said it tenderly in 20 years, and her voice remembered how before her mind did. Yes, I will have you, not the Duke. I care nothing for the Duke, and never did, as you may recall. The tired soldier who hates his title and needs the truth told him. Him I will marry, and gladly, and I will tell him the truth every day of his life, beginning now, which is that he has made me weep standing up in a ledger room at my age, and I have not the least intention of forgiving him for it. And the Duke of Eastmere, who had crossed Spain and Portugal, and 20 empty years to arrive at a beekeeper's hard-won peace, put his weathered face down against her earth-stained hand, where it lay on the ledgers, the way a man bows to the one altar he believes in, and did not say anything at all, because there are arrivals that silence is the only fit language for, and this was one. There was one thing she would not leave undone before she let herself be happy, and it concerned the girl who had carried the letters across 4 miles of mud. Maria went to Lucy a few days after, and found her white and anxious, for the child had grasped by now that the secret she had brought to light was her own mother's crime, and she had been waiting in dread to learn what it would cost her. "It will cost you nothing," Maria told her, taking the cold young hands in her own. "Hear me, Lucy, for I will say it once, and then we need never speak of it again. What your mother did is between your mother and me, and it is settled, and it will not touch you. You did a brave and frightening thing, and the only thing it has brought you is this: you are free. You will not be paraded before the Duke, nor before any man your mother fixes on. You will marry where your own heart settles, in your own time, and if your mother presses you, you will come to me, and I will stand between you and her for as long as I am above ground, which I intend to be a good while yet." The girl wept then, the easy cleansing tears of 18, and Maria held her, and understood that of all the things the forged letters had stolen, this at least could be given back in the next generation. A girl let free to choose where two before her had been chosen for. That settled, she did a thing she had not done in 20 years. She let herself want something openly, and then she went and stood with the wanting alone to be sure of it. It was evening, and she walked out among her hives in the last of the light, the bees gone quiet, the air sweet with the late flowers, and she made herself look hard at what she was about to do. She was giving up a great deal. The life she had built was a good one, sufficient, hers, answerable to no one. A wife, even a duke's wife, even a beloved wife, surrenders a portion of that, and she was too old and too honest to pretend otherwise. She stood among the bees and weighed the cottage and the garden, and the long ordered quiet against the man across the fields. And she found, turning it over with the same care she gave a balance of accounts, that the scale did not tip because she needed him. It tipped because she chose him. There was the whole of it, and the whole of the difference. The girl of 20 had needed him, had hung her future on him like a coat on a single nail, and when the nail was pulled, the whole life had come down. The woman of 42 needed nothing. She had built a wall that stood on its own, and into that standing house she would now, of her own free will, with her eyes open and her accounts balanced, invite one tired soldier to come and live. He would not be her roof. He would not be the nail her life hung on. He would be, simply, the person she had decided to spend the rest of the light with, and that was a thing chosen, not a thing needed. And she stood among her quiet hives until the stars came out and was certain of it, and, being certain, went in content. They were married before the winter, quietly, in the small church of the district, where they had first met across a country drawing room a lifetime before. There was no grand wedding. Neither of them had the heart for spectacle, and the county's curiosity could feed itself elsewhere. Lady Sibylla came, of course, in a hat like a galleon, and wept without shame, and declared to anyone who would listen that she had known the truth was rotten in the middle for 20 years, and was only sorry she had not turned out the right escritoire herself a decade sooner. Lucy came and stood up with her aunt, and understood, in the way the young come to understand such things, that she had been, all unknowing, the hand that set it right, and carried that knowledge for the rest of her life as a kind of secret warmth. There was a cost, and Maria had said from the first that she would not pretend otherwise, and she did not. The years were gone. No marriage, however good, gives back 20 years. And there were evenings, even in the contentment that came after, when one or the other of them would fall silent over some small thing, a date, a season, the particular slant of an autumn light, and the other would know that they were both thinking of the orchard, and the young people who had stood in it, and the wet fortnight that had killed them. They let those silences be. They had both lived too long to demand that happiness pretend the wound was never made. The years that came after were good ones, good in a particular way the young and the lucky never quite earn. He learned the district she had spent 20 years learning, walked the holdings at her side, sat with her over the ledgers in the evenings, while she taught him which roofs were honest and which were old, soap's lies, and the tenants who had feared a cold, absent landlord came in time to bring their troubles to the pair of them, as they had once brought them to her alone. She kept her bees. He took, to the quiet astonishment of the household, to standing at the hives beside her in the gold evening light, the very light that had fallen through the orchard a lifetime before, two greying heads bent together over the frames, and there was a justice in that, a small, late-mended justice that no court in the land could have handed down. There was no child. The title would pass, in time, to the cousin, and they made their peace with that too, and poured what they had instead into the land and the tenants, and into Lucy, who married well and for love, and named her first daughter Maria. And Delphine lived on 4 miles off, diminished and watchful, neither ruined nor restored, carrying her unpunished crime through a long grey afterward. And Maria called on her twice a year, and was civil, and was never warm. And that was the whole of the justice the world ever saw. And it was, between the sisters, exactly enough. But the cost was not the end of the account, and Maria, who had spent 20 years learning to read a balance honestly, would not let it be. For she had made her long truce with solitude once, alone, out of the wreckage, and it had been a real truce and a hard-won one, and she had thought it was the most a woman in her case could hope to have. And then a door had opened, and what came through it had not been, as she had braced herself to find, the ruin of that peace. It had been its completion. She had not needed him. That was the thing she came to treasure most, in the warm, late years that followed, more even than the love itself, that she had built a whole sufficient life with her own 2 hands, and had not needed any man to make it whole, and that out of that sufficiency, not out of any hunger, she had chosen him freely, knowing the cost, a tired, true soldier, come home at last to the one woman who had never, whatever she had been told, stopped being his. She had made her peace with solitude. And then the Duke walked in. And it turned out, after all the long, cold arithmetic of the years, that the peace had not been the end of her story, but only the place she had to reach before the rest of it could begin. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from, and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.